They say time heals all wounds, but at 73 I know better. Time does not heal, it teaches. Some scars never fade, they simply learn how to rest quietly under the surface of your skin. My life today feels like a gentle river, smooth and steady, carrying me through my final seasons with grace. I sit most mornings on the porch of my little brick home in Chicago, listening to the birds, sipping the coffee Henry brews just the way I like it. Around me, the laughter of grandchildren fills the yard on Sundays, and the scent of my herb garden, mint, basil, rosemary, floats through the warm air. Peace is the life I live now. But beneath the calm, there runs a current of memory so sharp, so cold, it could cut through stone. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and this is not just a story. It is a truth I carried in silence for decades, hidden behind smiles and polite conversations. It is the truth of a storm that nearly drowned me in my own home, by the very hands I once cradled as babies. The truth of how I survived the unthinkable. So if you're watching, baby, go ahead and like this video, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's story. 'Cause this ain't just my story, it's the story of too many women who had to smile through the silence. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, I want you to know, this is not a tale meant only to sadden, but to awaken. Some stories are heavy, yes, but they must be told, because in their telling they can save lives. So before we step into the storm, come with me first into the calm fields of my youth. To a small town in Cedarville, Ohio, where the girl I once was first learned what respect, equality, and love truly meant. I was born in 1948, the eldest of three. My father, George Hayes, worked for a local program that assisted Native American communities scattered throughout Ohio. He was a tall man, with rough hands that bore the weight of hard labor, but his heart was gentle. My mother, Margaret Hayes, taught at the only school in town, a one-room schoolhouse, where children of every age sat side by side. Our house was nothing fancy, just a wooden structure with white paint that peeled in the summer sun. The porch wrapped around the front, where hammocks swayed lazily on hot days. In the yard stood an old apple tree whose fruit we picked each fall, and a stubborn pear tree my mother swore bore the sweetest juice in the county. We weren't wealthy by any stretch. Father's paycheck barely covered expenses, and Mother's teaching brought in just enough for us to get by. But our home was rich in something more precious than gold, respect. I grew up hearing Father say to visitors, in this house, respect rules, not the man, not the woman. Respect itself. He never raised his voice to my mother, not once. When disagreements arose, they stepped outside, spoke quietly, and returned hand in hand. To us children, it seemed problems simply dissolved, but now I know it was because they built their love on equality. Mother always said, without respect, a family is like a house without a foundation. It will collapse with the first strong wind. And Father believed every child, boy or girl, should learn to take care of themselves. My brother Daniel, 2 years younger, washed his own clothes and learned to cook before he turned 10. My little sister Ruth, born when I was 8, learned to use tools, to fix things, to climb trees and defend herself. A weak woman, Mother would say, only exists in the imagination of a weak man. Our holidays were simple but magical. The 4th of July parades with flags fluttering in the hot summer wind, Thanksgiving feasts with pumpkin pie and apple crisp made from our own trees, and Christmas evenings when carols spilled out of every house in town. I often wore gingham dresses with ribbons tied at the ends of my braids, running barefoot across the fields with Daniel and Ruth. Life was simple, but it was full. And then there were the small rebellions of childhood, sneaking green apples from Mr. Burton's orchard, chasing fireflies until our palms glowed, or daring one another to climb the tallest hill behind the mill. My best friends were Anna, the storekeeper's daughter, and Peter, whose family ran a farm on the edge of town. Together, we built forts of hay and played hide-and-seek until the stars demanded we go home. But the most important lesson of all, the one my parents etched into my bones, was that men and women deserved equal respect. Violence was never acceptable. Family was a shelter, never a battlefield. By the time I was 12, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, just like my mother. I began helping her at the schoolhouse, guiding younger children through their alphabets. She'd often tell me, "Eleanor, you were born to teach. Your patience is your gift." I dreamed of growing up, marrying a good man, having a house full of children where laughter echoed and respect reigned. In Cedarville, those dreams felt so possible, so within reach. Yet even as a child, I noticed the difference between our household and others. Some nights, I heard neighbors shouting through thin walls. Some mornings, I saw women with bruises, muttering about falling downstairs. Girls my age were sometimes promised to older men, their lives decided before they had even begun. Those glimpses frightened me but also made me grateful. I believed my parents' love had built a shield around us, one that would last forever. I could not have known then how fragile that shield truly was. Sometimes I look back at old photographs, faded black and white images of a girl in braids and a flowered dress, sprinting through the fields without a care in the world. That girl believed her life would always be shaped by affection and respect. But life has its own designs. The storms do not warn us before they arrive. When I turned 17, on an unremarkable November afternoon in 1965, I met a man named Thomas Carter. He came from Dayton, a stranger with broad shoulders, a charming smile, and promises as sweet as honey. That meeting, so innocent, so ordinary, would become the pivot point that shifted the course of my entire life. And it is there, my dear, where the calm ends and the storm begins. It was late autumn, November of 1965, when I first saw Thomas Carter. Cedarville was dressed in shades of brown and gold, leaves scattering along the main road like confetti after a parade. I had gone to Mr. Burton's store to buy flour for my mother. It was there, among the barrels of beans and the dusty shelves of canned peaches, that my eyes first met him. He was leaning against the counter, telling stories of Dayton to a group of farmers who listened as if he were a traveler from a distant world. Tall, broad-shouldered, his hair dark and neat, his smile confident. When our eyes met, he tipped his hat and said, "Good afternoon, miss." That was all. Just 3 words. Yet they echoed in my mind for days afterward. As weeks passed, Thomas seemed to appear everywhere. At the market on Saturdays. At the churchyard on Sundays. Even near the schoolhouse, where I helped my mother teach. Each time, that same smile, that same warmth in his eyes. It wasn't long before he asked permission to visit me at home. He stood on our porch, hat in hand, speaking with my father. "Mr. Hayes," he said, his voice steady, "I have good intentions with your daughter. I'm a hard-working, honest man, and I wish to call on her properly." Father, cautious as always, replied, "In this house, Eleanor's wishes come first. If she wants to receive you, I won't stand in her way. But know this, here, respect is the rule." Mother, wise as ever, spoke to me afterward. "Eleanor, listen to your heart, but don't silence your head. True love is never in a hurry." But I was young, 17, with a heart wide open to the idea of romance. Thomas swept me into walks by the river, talks under the stars, and promises painted in gold. "I'll build you a house, Eleanor," he said once as we strolled through the fields. "We'll fill it with children, laughter, and joy. You'll be the happiest woman in Ohio." And I believed him. My parents, though respectful, had their doubts. "He's different from the boys here," Mother said quietly one evening. "He carries ideas about family that aren't like ours." But Thomas had a way of softening even the hardest concerns. He brought Father a pouch of fine tobacco, Mother a fabric bolt she turned into Sunday dresses, and for Daniel and Ruth he always carried sweets or trinkets. Slowly, he wove himself into the fabric of our family until resistance seemed impossible. By June of 1966, when I had just turned 18, we were married in the little white church at the center of Cedarville. My dress, sewn by Mother and Mrs. Whitaker the seamstress, was made of lace with tiny embroidered flowers. I can still smell the orange blossoms that adorned the altar, hear the guitar strings played by old Mr. Nelson, feel the rice showered over us as we left the church. That day, looking into Thomas's eyes, I swore I had found my forever. After the wedding, Thomas took me to Dayton, where he had secured work on the highway construction. Our first house was small, wooden, but neat. I decorated it with curtains stitched by hand and jars of preserves that reminded me of Cedarville. At first, it felt like living in a dream. Thomas was attentive, affectionate. He'd bring me wildflowers, kiss my forehead when he came home from work, and talk of the future we were building together. When our first son, William, was born in 1967, he handed out cigars at work and told anyone who'd listen, "My boy is here." My first son. Soon after came Olivia in 1969, then the others, David in 1970, Samuel in 1972, the twins Aaron and Andrew in 1974, Matthew in 1976, Clara in 1978, James in 1980, and finally Benjamin in 1982. 10 children. 8 boys and 2 girls. Exactly as Thomas had always wanted. But over the years, small shadows crept into our home. At first, they were almost invisible, Thomas complaining about the food, grumbling that the house wasn't tidy enough, questioning why I spoke too long with a neighbor. Then came the temper. A slammed fist on the table when I disagreed. A plate shattered because the stew was too salty. The loud scolding of children for being noisy. "This is nothing compared to other houses," I told myself. "He works hard. He's tired." But somewhere along the way, his definition of respect changed. "Respect starts with the wife obeying her husband," he told me once, eyes hard. "Your mother raised you wrong with this talk of equality." And in that moment, I realized that what my parents had modeled, mutual respect, was not the same thing Thomas believed in. To him, respect was submission. As years passed, Thomas's authority grew heavier. Visiting my parents in Cedarville became a fight. Talking with the elderly neighbor, Mr. Reynolds, drew accusations. His words shifted from "our children" to "my children." Slowly, I learned to make myself small in my own house, to tiptoe around moods, to quiet my voice before it sparked his temper. The boys watched. They saw their father speak over me, order me, dismiss me. They began to absorb it as truth. The girls, Olivia and Clara, watched too, with eyes that held both pity and fear. Perhaps they wondered if this was what their lives would one day look like. I was no longer Eleanor the dreamer, Eleanor the teacher's daughter. I was a shadow trailing behind Thomas's commands. Life continued like this until 1986, when Benjamin, our youngest, was only 4 years old. That year, Thomas was working on a bridge when a steel cable snapped. The blow was fatal. When the foreman came to my door with the news, I stood frozen. Part of me ached, for he was the father of my children, the man I had once loved with my whole being. But another part, buried so deep I could barely name it, felt something else. A kind of relief, so sharp it made me feel like a sinner. I swallowed it down. Guilt became my companion. But grief wasn't finished with me. 2 weeks later, a telegram arrived from Cedarville. My mother had died of a sudden heart attack. Preparing dinner, she collapsed, and there was no saving her. I returned home for the funeral to find my father, George Hayes, unrecognizable. A man once sturdy as oak, now bent, his eyes hollow. "I don't know how to live without her, Eleanor," he whispered, clutching my hands. "We were together for 50 years. What is left of me now?" It was in that moment, with both of us broken, that I made the decision that would unravel the next chapter of my life. "Come live with me in Dayton, Dad. We'll take care of each other. The children will love having their grandfather close." I thought I was saving him. Instead, I was unknowingly opening the door to a darkness I could never have imagined. Dayton, Ohio, 1986. The rain had not stopped the afternoon my father, George Hayes, stepped off the bus carrying a worn leather suitcase and a burlap sack. The drizzle dampened his coat, clung to the brim of his hat, and turned his silver hair into thin, plastered strands. He looked smaller somehow, as if the loss of my mother had shrunk the very frame that once seemed unshakable. "Dad," I whispered, running into his arms. I was nearly 40 then, with 10 children of my own, yet in his embrace I still felt like a daughter desperate for comfort. Only this time, it was him who trembled. "Now we'll take care of each other," I promised. He nodded faintly, his eyes darting toward the house behind me, where the children pressed against the window, curious about their new housemate. I believed I was rescuing him. I didn't know that in opening my door to grief, I was also letting in something much darker. The first days passed quietly. Father barely spoke. He would sit in the rocking chair I placed on the porch, staring into the gray horizon as if waiting for my mother to come walking back down the road. He ate little, spoke less, and slept fitfully. At night, I'd hear him pacing, his feet dragging against the floorboards. Sometimes he called out my mother's name, as if she could still answer. I worried, but I understood grief. I, too, had lost. My husband, for all his faults, was the father of my children. And my mother, my guiding light, was gone. So I told myself this was only a phase. Time would soothe him, as it had always soothed every wound. But time, I was beginning to learn, doesn't heal, it twists, it reshapes. And in my father, it carved something unrecognizable. After weeks of restless nights and erratic moods, I brought him to the local clinic. Dr. Harper, a kind man with soft gray eyes, examined him carefully. "Mrs. Carter," he told me gently, "your father is suffering from severe depression. The sudden loss of his wife has fractured him. He'll need medication, possibly therapy." I clutched the prescription slip as though it were a lifeline. But father rejected it outright. "Medicine is for weak men," he spat, tucking the pills under his tongue only to throw them away when he thought I wasn't looking. "George Hayes has never needed help to survive, and I won't start now." Instead of easing, his condition worsened. He muttered to himself, argued with invisible people, accused shadows in the corner of whispering about him. And then, slowly, he turned his gaze toward me. At first, it was small comments to the children. A sigh at the dinner table, a muttered remark about how their mother never appreciated their father enough. But soon it grew sharper. One afternoon, I found him under the apple tree in the yard, surrounded by my boys, William, David, Aaron, Andrew, Samuel, Matthew, James, like disciples at their teacher's feet. His voice was hard, bitter, nothing like the father who raised me. You need to know the truth about your mother, he told them. She mistreated your father. Complained every night when he came home tired. Embarrassed him in front of his friends. She wore him down until he had nothing left. I froze, my hands shaking around the basket of laundry I carried. That's not true, I wanted to scream. It was Thomas who belittled me, who raised his voice, who made me small. But the words tangled in my throat. And my sons, my babies I had cradled, breastfed, sung to sleep, listened with wide eyes and nodded as if his poison were scripture. The change came slowly, but it was undeniable. William, my firstborn, once so tender, began answering me curtly. Why should we listen to you? He snapped one evening when I asked him to help his younger brothers. Grandpa says you never respected Dad. Why should we respect you? David, just 16, glared at me when I corrected his language at the table. You drove Dad to his grave, he said coldly. Grandpa told us. Each word was a knife. Only Olivia and Clara, my daughters, stayed close to me, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. They were young but not blind. They saw the house shifting beneath us, love curdling into suspicion, laughter replaced by silence. One night, I woke to a sound footsteps in my room. When my eyes adjusted to the moonlight, I saw my son James, only 14, standing over my bed with a cast-iron skillet in his hands. Grandpa says you don't deserve to rest, he whispered. You're lazy. You need to be taught. Terror froze me. Just as he raised the skillet, instinct made me roll to the side. The blow crashed against the bed frame, splitting wood where my head had been. The sound echoed through the room, splintering, brutal. I scrambled out of bed, locked myself in the bathroom, and pressed my trembling back against the door. I stared into the cracked mirror, barely recognizing the hollow-eyed woman staring back. That night, something inside me shifted. Fear hardened into something sharper. They would not kill me. I would not die in this house. Still, the worst moment wasn't the skillet. It was the day I walked into the kitchen and found my father sitting at the table, his cane leaning against his chair, his eyes gleaming with a twisted satisfaction. I taught the boys how to correct you today, he said calmly. Just like I should have corrected your mother when she forgot her place. I stood frozen, my daughters clinging to my skirt, and for the first time, I saw not my father, but a stranger, a ghost wearing his face. The man who once taught me that respect was the foundation of a family had become the one tearing mine apart. That night, as I sat in my small room with Olivia and Clara asleep beside me, I whispered to myself, this will not be my ending. I didn't yet know how. But I knew this much, if I stayed, I would not live to see my girls grow. And worse, they would learn that abuse was normal, that violence was love. Something had to change. The storm had swallowed me whole, but somewhere in the eye of it, I felt the whisper of resolve. By 1987, my home in Dayton had become unrecognizable. Once filled with the laughter of children, it now echoed with whispers, accusations, and a silence so heavy it seemed to press against my chest. The poison my father, George Hayes, poured into the ears of my sons had taken root. What began as subtle contempt grew into open hostility. And I, the mother who once rocked them to sleep, was now treated as an intruder in my own house. It started with my eldest, William. He was 19 then, tall and broad like his father, carrying the weight of being the man of the house since Thomas's death. At first, he had promised me, "Don't worry, Ma. I'll take care of everyone. For a brief moment, I believed I could lean on him, that my eldest son would honor the values of respect I had raised him with. But my father's words had already begun to twist inside him. One evening, when I asked him to help set the table, William snapped. Why should I? You never respected Dad. You treated him like nothing. Grandpa told us everything. The sting wasn't just in his words, it was in the coldness of his eyes. He looked at me not as his mother, but as someone who had wronged him. Someone he had to correct. Soon, the younger boys followed. David, just 17, sneered when I reminded him to finish his chores. Aaron and Andrew, the twins, whispered with each other and laughed when I entered the room, as if sharing some cruel joke at my expense. Samuel, once gentle, began parroting my father's phrases about a woman's place. Even James, the same boy who had nearly struck me with the skillet, walked through the house with a hollow look in his eyes, waiting for orders from Grandpa. Only the little ones, Matthew, Clara, and Benjamin, remained untouched for a time. And my daughters, Olivia and Clara, clung to me like shadows, refusing to let go. The insults grew daily. You're the reason Dad died. You embarrassed him until he couldn't take it anymore. You're a disgrace to this family. I tried to reason, tried to explain. Your grandfather is sick. His grief is twisting his mind. You mustn't believe these lies. But they refused to listen. To them, my father was a figure of wisdom, the patriarch who spoke nothing but truth. And so I became a liar. The enemy. The target. It wasn't always fists or shoves. Sometimes it was silent. The boys would sit together at dinner, laughing and talking, while my words fell flat, ignored. They refused to eat food I cooked unless my father blessed it first. They demanded I serve them before I served myself. I became a ghost in my own home, moving quietly, cooking, cleaning, existing, but not living. Every night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if the next sunrise would bring more bruises, more accusations, more attempts to correct me. My daughters saw it all. Olivia, 17, tried to defend me once when William shouted at me in the kitchen. She stepped between us, trembling but fierce. "Stop talking to Mom like that," she cried. William's face twisted. "Stay out of this, Olivia. Unless you want to end up just like her." The way he said it, the venom in his tone, froze her. Later that night, as I braided Clara's hair, she whispered, "Mommy, why does Grandpa hate you? Why do my brothers act like this?" I swallowed back tears. How could I explain that grief had stolen the mind of the man who once taught me respect? That love had curdled into poison? "He's sick, baby," I told her softly. "Not the kind of sickness you can see. The kind that makes the heart and head hurt. But you must remember, it's not the truth." Clara nodded, though her eyes betrayed the doubt children carry when the world they know begins to crumble. The worst came in the spring of 1988. I had gone to the market that morning to sell loaves of bread, the way I always did to make extra money. When I returned, the house was too quiet. Stepping into the kitchen, I froze. My father sat at the table, his cane resting against the wall. Around him stood William, David, Aaron, Andrew, and James, all of them watching me with hard, expectant eyes. "I taught the boys how to correct you today," Father said calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. "Like I should have corrected your mother when she started forgetting her place." Before I could respond, William grabbed my arm so tightly his fingers left bruises. "It's time you learned what respect means," he said, his voice chillingly steady. What followed was not just physical, it was psychological warfare. A slap here, a shove there, but worse were the words. You killed our father. You'll learn to obey. You're not fit to be a mother. I begged, pleaded, reminded them of lullabies sung in the dark, scraped knees I had kissed, fevers I had soothed. But they looked at me like I was a stranger. It was only when Olivia burst into the room, screaming for them to stop, that the spell broke. My boys hesitated long enough for me to stumble away, clutching my aching ribs, my face burning with humiliation. At the doorway, my father leaned back in his chair, a strange smile curving his lips. "Very good, boys," he said. "That's how a household is kept in order." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, my body trembling, my spirit broken. I thought of the man who had raised me, the one who had taught me respect, who had never raised a hand to my mother, who had built our family on equality. Where had he gone? The man in my kitchen was not George Hayes, my father. He was a ghost wearing his face, twisted by grief and madness. And my sons, my sweet boys, had become soldiers in his war. I knew then what I had refused to admit for months: if I stayed, I would die. Not just me, but my daughters too. Olivia's defiance would one day draw their wrath. Clara's innocence would be crushed under the weight of my father's lies. That night, as I lay awake, I whispered to myself, "This cannot be the end of our story." And for the first time, a plan, faint, fragile, but alive, began to stir inside me. I didn't know yet how or when, but I knew this: I had to escape. By the spring of 1989, my house no longer felt like a home. The walls seemed to breathe suspicion. The floorboards whispered with footsteps of sons who no longer saw me as their mother. My daughters slept pressed against me at night, as if their small bodies could shield me from the storm that raged within our walls. But nothing could shield me from what was coming. It was past midnight when I woke to the creak of the bedroom door. The moonlight through the curtains cast a pale glow across the room, enough for me to see a shadow moving toward my bed. My breath caught. In his hands, raised above his head, was James, only 14 years old, clutching a cast-iron skillet. His eyes, once bright with boyish mischief, were empty, hollow, as though my father's voice had replaced his own. "Grandpa says you don't deserve to rest," he whispered. "You're lazy. You need to be taught." For a moment, time stopped. Then instinct kicked in. I rolled off the bed just as the skillet came crashing down. The sound of metal striking would split the silence like thunder. The bed frame splintered, shards of wood flying where my head had been moments before. The echo of that blow stayed with me long after the sound itself faded. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear my own breath. James raised the skillet again, but I slipped past him and bolted down the narrow hall, slamming the bathroom door shut behind me. With trembling hands, I turned the lock and pressed my back against the cold wood. For hours, I sat there in the dark, listening to his footsteps pacing outside. My own reflection stared back at me from the cracked mirror above the sink. The woman I saw was not the girl from Cedarville with braids in her hair. She was not the young bride who once believed in promises of forever. She was a ghost of herself, sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, trembling lips. And yet, in those hollow eyes, I saw something else, something sharp, something unbreakable. They would not kill me. Not in my own bed. Not while my daughters still clung to me for safety. The next morning, James avoided my gaze. My father came in hand, sat in the kitchen with a satisfied look, as though the night's events had proven a lesson well learned. "You see, Eleanor," he said softly when the others weren't listening, "this is how order is restored. A woman must never forget her place." His calmness chilled me more than the skillet ever could. And my sons, they no longer needed to raise their fists. Their silence was enough. The way they looked at me threw me, as though I were already dead. It was then that I understood. The poison had taken hold. I could not undo it. I could not save them from it. But I could still save Olivia and Clara. That night, exhaustion dragged me into a restless sleep. And in that sleep, I saw her, my mother, Margaret Hayes. She sat at the foot of my bed, her hands folded in her lap, her face glowing softly the way I remembered when she read to me as a child. I could almost smell the faint scent of her soap, and hear the calm rhythm of her voice. "Daughter," she said, her tone both tender and firm, "you are mine. You were raised in respect. Do not let them bury you alive. Protect your girls. Protect yourself. Hayes does not bow to cruelty." When I woke, the room was empty. But her voice lingered like a steady flame inside me. It was no longer enough to survive one more day. I had to reclaim it tomorrow. I began to plan in whispers, plans formed in the dark, while the house slept. Every detail mattered. I remembered Samuel, an old friend of Thomas's who worked at the market. He had always been respectful, always treated me kindly. Perhaps he could help. I remembered the bottles of mild sleeping pills at the pharmacy, prescribed often for insomnia. If I could lace the iced tea at lunch, the boys and my father might sleep long enough for me and the girls to flee. I remembered the few dollars I had hidden, savings from bread and cakes I sold in secret. Not much, but maybe enough to start. It would mean leaving behind my sons. The thought tore me apart, ripping through my chest like glass. But if I stayed, I would not live long enough to see them become men. And my daughters, if I left them here, they would grow up believing abuse was their inheritance. I could not allow that. One evening, as I sat quietly by the window, Olivia touched my hand. "Mom," she whispered, "we can't live like this. They're going to hurt you worse next time. Maybe even kill you." Her voice cracked on the last words. I looked at her, my firstborn daughter, her eyes wide with both fear and a determination beyond her years. In her, I saw myself at 17, full of dreams, desperate for freedom. "You're right," I whispered back, clutching her hand. "We can't. But you must trust me. When the time comes, you and Clara must follow me without question." She nodded. That night I lay awake in bed, holding both of my girls close, whispering silent prayers into their hair. The skillet's echo still haunted me. But where it once froze me with terror, now it fueled me with resolve. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow I will begin. The plan was dangerous, risky, but it was the only way to break free of the chains that bound us inside that house. I was not ready to die, and I refused to let my daughters live in the shadow of my father's madness. It was time to prepare for escape. The decision was made. Not by chance, not by impulse, but by necessity. If I stayed in that house, I would not survive. More than that, my daughters, Olivia and Clara, would grow up believing cruelty was love, that silence was obedience, that a woman's worth was measured by how well she bowed her head. I refused to let that happen. It was April 1990 when I began to put my plan in motion. That Tuesday dawned with a soft drizzle, the kind that clings to your clothes and seeps into your bones. I rose early, as always, preparing bread and potato cakes for the market. But this time, I whispered to Olivia before anyone else stirred. "Get dressed quietly," I told her. "You're coming with me. And bring Clara too. Tell the others you want to help carry the baskets." Her eyes widened, but she didn't argue. She had learned by then that I spoke in whispers only when the air was heavy with danger. At the breakfast table, William frowned. "Why take both girls? Olivia's old enough to help you." Leave Clara here. I forced a casual smile, though my heart raced. She's learning how to count money. She wants to practice at the stall. Before William could object, my father looked up from his oatmeal. For a flicker of a moment, his eyes were clear, lucid. Let them go, he said flatly. It's good for them to learn young. I nodded quickly, hiding my relief. By mid-morning, the three of us were on our way to the market, baskets balanced in our arms. The drizzle had stopped, but the air still smelled of rain. Each step toward town felt like a step closer to freedom. The market buzzed with its usual rhythm, vendors calling out prices, children weaving between stalls, the scent of roasted peanuts and fried dough drifting through the air. I found Samuel near the tool stand, his broad frame unmistakable. He had served in the army years before and carried himself with the posture of a man who had seen too much, but still kept his dignity intact. When he spotted me, his weathered face softened into a smile. "Mrs. Carter," he said warmly. "Good to see you. How are things?" I glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, then stepped closer. My voice trembled. "Samuel, I need your help. It's urgent." Something in my tone must have struck him, because his smile faded. He guided me behind the stall, where the noise of the market dulled to a murmur. There, with tears I could no longer hold back, I told him everything. The abuse. The lies. The night James nearly crushed my skull with a skillet. My father's poisonous influence. The way my sons had turned into strangers. I showed him the bruises on my arm, purple and raw. I confessed the plan I had pieced together, the sleeping pills, the escape with my daughters, the fear of being pursued. Samuel listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with every word. When I finished, he placed a hand gently on my shoulder. "Eleanor," he said firmly, "you don't deserve this. No woman does. You're right to leave, and I'll help you. I know people, men who don't ask questions, but make sure others stay in line. Your father and your boys? They're bullies. When faced with real men, they'll back down." His words were a balm, but also a warning. This was no longer just about escape. It was about survival. On the way home, I stopped at the pharmacy. The old pharmacist, Mr. Green, had known me for years. He handed me a small bottle of mild sleeping pills, his eyes searching mine with quiet understanding. He asked no questions. At home, I hid the pills inside the folds of a dish towel. My heart raced as I stirred stew that afternoon, every clang of a spoon sounding louder than thunder. When the iced tea was ready, I carefully crushed the pills, mixing them in. Enough to induce sleep, not enough to cause harm. I whispered to Olivia before we set the table, "Tonight, don't drink the tea. Tell Clara to ask for water. Do you understand?" Her eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded. "I understand, Mama." Dinner passed in unbearable slowness. My father, cane at his side, sat at the head of the table. The boys joked loudly, unaware of the storm brewing in the silence between us. They drank glass after glass of tea, the heat of the day giving me cover. Olivia and Clara sipped water unnoticed. My hands shook as I ladled stew into bowls. I forced myself to smile when William cracked a joke, to nod when Aaron asked for seconds, to pretend everything was as it should be. Inside, my heart beat like a drum. Minutes ticked into eternity. Then, at last, the effects began to show. Benjamin, the youngest, yawned first. "I'm tired," he murmured, stumbling to his room. Then Christopher. Then the twins. One by one, their laughter dulled into sluggishness. Their eyes drooped. Their words slurred. Even my father fought against the pull of sleep, his jaw clenching as he tried to stay upright in his chair. But at last, his eyes closed, his breathing deep and heavy. The house fell into silence. "Now," I whispered. Olivia grabbed the small bundle I had hidden at the back of the closet. Clothes, a few family photos, Mother's wedding ring, and the little money I had saved. Clara clutched my hand, her small fingers cold with fear. We crept through the kitchen, past my father's slumped form. For a moment I paused, staring at him. This was the man who taught me respect. The man who once lifted me onto his shoulders to watch fireworks in Cedarville. The man who had twisted into something unrecognizable. A tear slid down my cheek. "Goodbye, Daddy," I whispered. Then we slipped into the night. Samuel was waiting where he said he would be, his old Jeep parked by the edge of town. Two men stood with him, rough-looking, but quiet. They didn't meet my eyes. "Everything's ready," Samuel said as he helped us climb in. "You'll spend the night at my sister's house. Tomorrow morning, a truck leaves for Chicago. The driver's trustworthy. He won't ask questions." As the Jeep rattled down the dirt road, I turned to look back one last time. The lights of the house glowed faintly in the distance, a place that had once held all my dreams. I thought of the boys I was leaving behind, William, David, James, all of them. My heart cracked under the weight of it. They were my children. I loved them still, even as they turned against me. But love could not save me anymore. I turned forward, holding Clara against my chest, gripping Olivia's hand. Ahead lay darkness, but also hope. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe in tomorrow. That night, in Samuel's sister's modest home, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Olivia and Clara slept beside me, their breathing soft, their faces calm. I whispered a prayer into the stillness. "Lord, guide my boys. Let them one day see the truth. Protect them, even from themselves. And give me strength to begin again." The prayer ended in tears, but not of despair, tears of resolve. Because I knew this was only the end of one story, and the beginning of another. The dawn that greeted us in Chicago felt different than any I had known before. Not because the sun shone brighter or the wind blew softer, it was because for the first time in years, I breathed as a free woman. The truck ride had been long, the city unfamiliar, but as we crossed the bridge and saw the Chicago River glittering under morning light, I felt a spark of hope ignite inside me. Hope, raw, trembling, but alive. We were three women alone in a vast city. We had little more than a bundle of clothes, a handful of dollars, and our will to survive. But sometimes, that is enough. Samuel's cousin arranged for us to stay in a small room at the back of a boarding house near Halsted Street. It smelled faintly of mildew and boiled cabbage, but it had a door we could lock and beds we didn't fear being dragged from. The first night, Olivia whispered, "It's small, Mama, but it feels safe." I hugged her tightly. "Then it's worth more than gold." I used the few dollars I had left to buy flour, sugar, and a second-hand pan. By the next morning, I was baking bread and cakes to sell at the nearby bus station. I stood there each day with a basket on my arm, greeting strangers, smiling even when my heart ached. Chicago was bigger, louder, faster than Dayton. But it didn't scare me. After what I had left behind, nothing could. Olivia, 17 and wise beyond her years, found work in a fabric shop downtown. She returned home each evening with her fingers pricked from pins and her face flushed with pride. "Mama," she told me once, "one day I'll have my own shop. I'll make dresses for women who want to feel strong, not small." Her words were a mirror of my own buried dreams. Clara, only 12, enrolled in the local public school. At first, she was shy, quiet, but soon her teachers told me she was excelling, bright, thoughtful, full of questions. Watching them blossom in the fresh air of freedom gave me strength to keep pushing forward. It was at the bus station one gray morning that I met Henry Whitman. He had just stepped off a bus from Peoria, carrying a worn leather case and a guitar strapped across his back. He was tall, in his early 50s, with kind eyes that seemed to see beyond surfaces. He stopped at my stall, bought a slice of coffee cake, and lingered. "This is the best thing I've tasted in months," he said with a smile. "Do you make these yourself?" I nodded shyly. "Yes. It's how I feed my girls." The next day, he came back. And the next. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but eventually Olivia teased me, "Mama, he doesn't come for the cake. He comes for you." Henry was a retired music teacher, a widower who had lost his wife to cancer a decade earlier. He carried sadness in his eyes, but also a gentleness I had not known in years. He never rushed me, never demanded. He simply showed up, helping Clara with her homework, teaching her guitar chords, walking me home when evenings grew dark. For months, I kept my heart guarded. After all I had endured, I no longer trusted promises. But Henry never offered empty ones. He only gave consistency, respect, and patience. One evening, as we walked along the river, he said softly, "Eleanor, I don't want to replace what you lost. I only want to be part of what you're building now." Tears welled in my eyes. That was the first time I allowed myself to believe love might not always wound. 2 years later, in a modest chapel with only a handful of friends, I married Henry. There were no grand decorations, no lavish feast, just simplicity, sincerity, and joy. Olivia stood beside me in a dress she had sewn herself, and Clara played a song on the guitar Henry had taught her to love. Together, Henry and I bought a small brick house with a yard, where I planted herbs once more, basil, mint, thyme. The laughter of my grandchildren now fills that yard on Sundays. Henry invested part of his savings into a small deli, which became our family business. Later, he started a little publishing press for regional music, his lifelong passion. It gave him purpose. It gave me pride to see him thrive. Life was not without its scars. I still thought of my sons. I still wondered if they ever realized the truth, if they ever forgave me. News trickled in over the years. William moved to Cleveland. The twins out west, Benjamin taken in by an uncle. My father passed away in 1995, never finding peace. When I cried for him, it wasn't for the cruel man he became, but for the father I lost long before his death. Now, at 73, I sit on my porch in Chicago, the scent of herbs mingling with the laughter of children. Beside me, Henry strums his guitar, his voice soft with age but still steady. The scars of my past remain. They are etched into me like maps, each wrinkle, each line, a reminder of where I've been. People often ask, "How did you survive?" The truth is, survival wasn't a roar. It was a whisper. It was the night I locked myself in the bathroom and told myself, "Tomorrow I will escape." Strength is not the absence of fear. Strength is walking forward even while fear grips you. I have learned that surviving is resistance. And living well, loving fully, laughing freely, is the greatest revenge. If you are listening to my story and you are trapped in a place of fear, I want you to know this. You are not weak for wanting to leave. You are not foolish for still loving those who hurt you. But you deserve to live without fear. You deserve to wake up to peace, not terror. Seek help. Tell someone. Find your Samuel, your Henry, because they exist. There are people in this world who will stand with you when you take that first trembling step. And remember, your scars do not define you. They are proof that you survived. As I watch the sun dip behind the skyline of Chicago, I whisper a quiet prayer of gratitude. For Olivia, who built a dress shop of her own. For Clara, who became a teacher and fills classrooms with music. For Henry, who loves me with patience and respect. For the chance to write a new chapter when I thought my story was over. This is my new dawn. A life rebuilt. A family reborn. A heart scarred, but whole. And if my story can light a path for even one person lost in the shadows, then all I endured will not have been in vain. Because no matter how dark the night, morning always comes. You know, it took me a lifetime to let these words leave my lips. For years, my story sat inside me like an old letter, sealed, hidden in the bottom drawer, its paper yellowing, its ink fading. I stayed silent, because silence felt safer. But silence is also a thief. It steals our truths, our healing, and sometimes, even our names. Tonight, I broke that silence. Not for pity, not for judgment, but because stories, once carried alone, grow too heavy for one heart. And when they are spoken aloud, they turn into lanterns, guiding someone else out of the dark. I may be an old woman now, with hair silvered by time and hands wrinkled like riverbeds, but I still believe in beginnings. My scars no longer shame me, they are maps of the storms I crossed and proof that I arrived on the other side. So, if you are listening and you carry your own shadows, remember this. You are not the broken things done to you. You are the breath that keeps rising, the seed that keeps pushing toward the light. Survival is not the end of your story. It is the doorway to your becoming. And legacy? Legacy is not about the pain we endured. It's about the strength we leave behind. I tell mine so my daughters, and perhaps your daughters too, will know. Silence is not the end, and fear is not forever. If this story touched you, sit with it. Share it. Let it ripple outward by leaving a comment, a like, and make sure to subscribe, or a simple whisper of your own truth. Each voice matters. Each story can save a life. As for me, Eleanor Hayes was the name I was given. But tonight, as I close this chapter, I choose to be remembered not as the woman who suffered, but as the woman who rose. And so, I leave you here not in sorrow, but in renewal. Because even the heaviest night must bow to morning. And I am, at last, standing in the dawn.